we'll make a start. And yeah, welcome to today's webinar. We've got a series of 3 webinars, part of a Meat and Livestock Australia producer demonstration site project called Realising Benefits from Sheep eID's. This webinar's all about production and finishing systems, and it'll be followed by other webinars on data management and animal selection. So my name's Alison Frischke. I'm a project manager with BCG, and together with Grace Hosking and our partners with Southern Farming Systems Group, the PDS managers. We've got Grace Evans, Jess Wettenhall, and Michelle McClure there. So we've been working together on the project. And just a bit of a background to the PDS. So despite eIDs being mandatory in Victoria, the benefits that you as producers are currently deriving from them has been quite low. So it begs the question why, I guess. And you may have seen the report by Hamish Dixon for MLA a couple of years ago, describing positive case studies, showing and modelling examples showing attractive returns from on the investment. But the report suggests that the benefits from eID probably aren't clearly defined for all the sheep sectors. As producers, we tend to focus on the cost rather than profit. So the PDS has also supported the need for a stronger value proposition, like what benefit to you is it as a grower, but our focus has broadened wider than just the breeding side of things. Because when the project started, mixed farmers across the BCG and Southern Farming System zones were increasing their livestock numbers. So fine-tuning the breeding objectives was certainly a focus, but other benefits from using eID included making livestock easier to run amongst the mixed farming operations, reducing labour and physical exertion, improving operational efficiency, so that whole farm management stuff, and matching feeding to livestock condition. So not all of these ways are going to be cost-effective ways of things, but they can bring these other benefits to the farm business. So this SFS and BCG PDS has been about having conversations with commercial producers and growers and breeders to describe the benefits that they're looking for out of eID, have a go at using it, and then share experiences. And that includes the pros and cons. So the focus for today's webinar, as we've said, is all about product. Why do we want to use eID and ways of using it to drive production amongst different systems. And so introduce Nathan Scott here now. Many of you are familiar with Nathan over the years, but Nathan's a consultant with Achieve Ag Solutions based in Inverleigh, Victoria. Nathan's got a background in prime land production and a passion for improving the productivity and profitability of livestock enterprises. He works with producers to increase conception rates, improve lamb survival, lift growth rates, and hone overall management. Nathan provides advice to individual clients and works with a number of producer groups, and as a keynote speaker and involved with various industry projects. Nathan's become a leading advisor in the practical use of eID within stud and commercial and sheep and cattle enterprises. And yeah, I'd like you, we'd welcome you now, Nathan, to share your screen and give today's presentation.
Very much, Alison, and thanks everyone for having me. I thought I would choose the title of Sheep eID, Making It Work for You, because I think we have got a bit lost all the way through. But eID is certainly not a new technology. First introduced in the 1990s as the first RFID tag was released for sheep, so certainly not a new technology, and one that I'm a huge advocate for on the biosecurity side of things. But for the last 15 years, I've been looking at what the on-farm benefits might be, and we actually started out in this space, I think, probably coming at it from the wrong angle. And to touch on that a little bit more, we all need to start with a pretty simple question, which is why do we want it in the first place? Why are we trying to find a use for eID? Why are we looking at the technology? And there's 2 pretty standard answers in this. It's we're either trying to achieve better animals or better management. But why I say I think we've got it wrong over the last 15 years is I think we went about it completely backwards, and partly because we did have a technology and a new technology that we were all excited about. But from your point of view on farm, I want you to look at it entirely differently. And this goes for any technology that you're considering. Don't buy a solution and then look for a problem to solve with it. And I think we've all been a bit guilty of that, in that eID came along. It's an amazing piece of technology. We can literally record anything you like against an individual animal. But we have to constantly come back to that question of why. What is it that we're actually trying to achieve? So that's where I want us to start, and that's where I want everyone to start whenever they think about any new technology, but eID being the example today, is let's start with what our endpoint actually is. And great to hear that there's a lot of talk about breeding objectives and business objectives and things, but we need to start with what's actually holding us back. So before we go delving into what eID might be capable of, I just want you to pause for a moment and think about, in your own business, if you could click your fingers and change 2 or 3 things that would help, things that are within your control or could be within your control, what is it that's actually holding you back? What do you need more information on so you can make better decisions or better ability to apply selection pressure if you're in a breeding flock? Because the one thing that's really obvious with eID, and this is back to Alison's point earlier, we've spent 15 years trying to build case studies around, if you do this, you'll make this much more money, and all these profit propositions. And the reality is tags don't make you a damn thing. They don't make you a single dollar. It's decisions that make you money, not tags. And so we can set 2 identical farms up with exactly the same equipment. One will make profit improvements, and all the other has done is add expense, and that's on the back of their decision-making capacity. So we need to start with what it is that you're trying to achieve in the first place, and that should start with a business or a breeding objective, and then working out what role eID might play. So I want to start with that as our basis. And then as we start to think about how we might be able to use eID and why it might be a powerful tool for us, we need to think about what happens within our flock. So this is something that I've talked about for a long time, but in all of genetics, we have this thing called population dynamics. So we have a bell-shaped curve where we have poor performers, we've got average performers, and we've got our superior performers. Now, that gives us an opportunity to be able to apply selection pressure because we've got this variation. It doesn't matter what trait we're talking about. If we're talking about people, that might be in height. It could be in, you name it, anything. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about people, sheep, cows, cats, dogs. There will be this population dynamics, this variation in performance that exists for a range of traits. So it allows us to apply some selection pressure. So if we know how an individual animal is performing and we decide that they are a poor performer, then we can apply selection pressure and we can give that curve a nudge. So as we drop the poor performers off, it changes the shape of that bell-shaped curve, but we've still got a bell-shaped curve. And that gives us what we're calling generational improvement. So in other words, the generation of animals, so that might be give us an example of, say, the blue tag lambs. We've identified the poor performers for a given trait. We've kicked them out. That generation of lambs is now better because we've only left ourselves with the average and the superior performance. So it's an immediate jump in average performance for that group of animals as soon as we kick those poor performers out. So that's the first step. We can do that in any age group, and it does help us make some improvements without us relying on what we've traditionally done, which is kick out an age group. So historically, if things get a bit tight, we've certainly seen across all of southern Victoria, most of a fair bit of southern and western Victoria, and right across to the West Australian border, as things have been tight over this last 18 months, people have had to drop some numbers. The question comes, who do we sell? And far too often, it's just an age group. It's just a group of animals because they've had a birthday. Nothing to do with whether they're a good performer or a bad performer. It's just we'll sell the oldest age group. If we know the individual performance, that gives us this opportunity to apply a bit more selection pressure. So that gives us some generational improvement that happens. But on top of that, we also get the opportunity that presents that the animals that we're now breeding from are theoretically of a higher genetic merit And so cumulatively, we'll make some genetic gain. And so if we are, and while some of the traits, particularly if it happens to be a fertility trait or something that people will often say, oh, but that's quite low heritability. And often that is true. Some of these traits are low heritability, but they're still heritable. So if we continually apply selection pressure to these things over time, then we will make improvements on them, even if they are relatively low heritability traits. So I want us to think about if you're a breeding flock. So we're obviously going to have a range of people across this audience in terms of whether you're running breeders or whether you're trading. And I sort of want to touch on all of those opportunities. But if you are running a breeding flock, then a simple question I want to ask you is, where do your genetics come from? Now, I use a cattle example here because visually it works better than when I do it with sheep. But we often spend a lot of time applying pressure, selection pressure, working out who we're going to use on the sire side, using ASBVs and trying to decide which genetics we want to bring in. We don't pay enough attention to where 50% of the genetics are coming from, and that's the dam side. We're not putting as much selection pressure as we could be on our ewes, or if we've got cattle people in the room as well, on our cows, when we are actually spending a huge amount of time and money on the sire side. So just thinking about whether we can actually approach it from both sides. And there's a lot of different traits that we can look at on that side of things. So I just want to touch on a few that we've actually pulled. This is actual data from farms that we've been dealing with over the last 15 years or so, just to show you what sort of variation we're actually talking about. So that bell-shaped curve that I mentioned, I want to show you what that actually looks like in terms of animal performance. So this one is from a client that had 1,000 weaners that they wanted to test for fleece weight and micron. So it was a merino operation, obviously, and they wanted to see what their variation really looked like because they'd had a classer doing visual classing, but they wanted to put some numbers around it. Now, we know that there's a general trend that as we select for more fleece weight, we will generally end up with a higher micron and vice versa. But this shows you that in that group of weaners, there actually wasn't a terribly strong relationship that was evident there. But we do start to get ask the question about some of those outlying animals. So we're not necessarily looking to pick the eyes out of it at the top end, but we just want to fold the edges in and find the animals that are the passengers in our system. So if we convert that data, which can be done quite easily, over to a wool value per head. Now, this was done a while ago with a different wool price than what we're getting at the moment, but this is the sort of graph, and it's all relative. You don't need to really worry about the dollar values up the side, but this shows you what that data looks like when it's represented as a wool value per head. And it allows us just to start to ask some questions of animals that we got on our farm. Should you even be here? These animals that are at the bottom end here, why we're still having to drench them, we're still having to chase them around for flies, still having to put in all of the work that we have to for the better performers, and yet these animals aren't returning us very much. So it allows us just to identify those poor performers, the passengers in our system, and to kick them out. Now, when we start talking about reproduction, clearly there's going to be some variations in reproductive performance. We don't necessarily need eID for this one, because if you're scanning for multiples, then we already have the opportunity to apply a lot of that selection pressure. If we're selling our dry ewes at scanning, and if we're doing our work at marking to identify those that have lost the lamb, then we can already apply a lot of that selection pressure without eID, because basically there's no second chances there. We can just kick them out. If you are wanting to offer a second chance, then eID does give you that opportunity, because you can identify who they are, and it doesn't matter whether we go through a shearing in between times where you would otherwise lose a brand or a mark. You can have it recorded against the electronic tag. But again, this is just looking at some of the options for those that are breeding. We started to look with some of the farms that we're dealing with at what's actually happening with growth rates. And I think this is where it sort of opens up into the broader audience of if you've got lambs that you're trying to grow, whether they're your lambs or you've bought them in, we want to know what's actually happening. And the reality is we haven't known historically, we genuinely haven't known what's happening. So this is a graph that we were able to pull together. This is from birth, so it's using an estimated birth weight on these lambs through until weaning. and that gives us an average growth rate per day for these lambs. So growth rate up the side. And it shows that we've got some lambs in this group. This is just commercial composite lambs off a property not far from here at Inverleigh. And we had some lambs that have only been averaging around that sort of 200 to 300 grams a day. Through that period, we've got some there that are well over 400 and even over 500 grams a day. Now, they're staggering growth rates, particularly given that as an industry, we tend to talk about 300 grams a lot. Trying to achieve 300 grams a day seems to be the number that everyone's sort of looking for. And yet this shows us that some of these lambs are absolutely flying. This is in this very early phase, so birth to weaning, absolutely flying, doing well over 400 grams a day. Now, in this particular group of animals, we had actually used a process called pedigree matchmaker, which I won't bother talking about today, but it did allow us to know which ewe these lambs had come from. So we actually knew whether they were reared as a twin or a single. And I just want you to focus on the top 3 dots, the very top of this graph here. We've got 3 dots up there that have achieved massive growth rates, 550 grams a day. Now, normally, and I like to think that I know a bit about sheep, I would have walked into that pen full of lambs and I would have said, they've got to be singles. They have to be singles. But the reality is, because we had, in this trial, we had done some work to figure out who belonged to who, we actually realised that 2 of those top growth rates were twin lambs. They weren't a pair of twins, they were an individual lamb from a pair of twins each, but they were achieving staggering growth rates as twins. And yet we've always assumed that our singles are going to be first out the gate. Our singles are the ones that are achieving the great growth rates, and it's just not always the case. But in this example here, they were actually averaging 385 grams a day. Now, the most exciting thing for me, and I think what should be pretty exciting for everyone, is some new technologies that have been released recently, which are allowing us to get a better understanding of what's actually happening with these growth rates, who's growing when, how are they doing it, and that comes in the form of this thing called an OptiWeigh. Now, I will talk about equipment more as we go later on, but it's important for me just to throw this one in here now because it gives us the chance to talk about real-time feedback. So an OptiWeigh is a very clever piece of gear. I've got no alliance with them, so certainly not here to try and sell you one. It's just that I've got some clients that have bought them recently for both cattle and for sheep. What it does is the animal is attracted to the OptiWeigh because it has salt in the feeder section in here. And so the lamb goes in, or ewes can walk in here. They will get access to some salt. They've got to work pretty hard to get that salt out. So they poke their head in there, they're eating the salt, and the OptiWeigh has the capacity to calculate a live weight of that animal just based off its front feet being on that little platform there. Now, that's pretty amazing. And what it allows us to do is to get real-time feedback of what's happening with lambs growing. It has a built-in eID reader, so it reads the animal's individual tag so that we know individual lambs' growth rates in the paddock or in your containment pens or in your feedlot. And that's pretty exciting because not only does it give us amazing information, but it actually delivers it to us in a really user-friendly format on our phone. So one of my clients has kindly shared some of his data with us so that I can show you an example of things that happen. So this is...
Nathan, could I just ask, back on the OptiWeigh, is there a weight panel on each, weight pad on each side, is there? So you can have 2 individual weights? Yep,
individual weight panel on either side, so platform. So individual, so you can have 2 animals in there at the same time being weighed with their eID tag being read. Good question, though. And if anyone has questions, please fire them at me as we go, and Alison can help me with them as we go through. So just back on this OptiWeigh chart that's presented. So just to talk you through, the orange bars are the number of animals that have been weighed in any given day, and you'll see the orange numbers up the right-hand side. So in this case, there was about, I think, 300 to 350 animals in a pen. This was in a containment or feedlot pen. So it's weighing about close to 200 of them most days. And then the green line is the live weight of the animals over time. So you'll see there's a couple of anomalies on this line that I want to talk you through. So the first big drop that happens This one is an amusing one to some degree because what actually happened in this case was something spooked some sheep and they knocked a section of fence over in his containment area, and some light lambs got in with some heavy lambs and started being weighed by the Optiweigh, so it dramatically dropped the average weight of the mob, not because the actual weight had dropped of any animals, it was just because all of a sudden we had lighter animals being weighed in that process. Then as we come along this line, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. But where you see the number 50.8 there, and you'll see a little drop off just after that, that's actually the moment that this client's house burnt down. And the next day, he wasn't able to actually get there to feed the sheep on time. And we can see that that had an impact on their growth. It actually caused them to just come off in their live weight just a tiny bit. And enough for us to actually see that little interruption. Now, not everyone's going to have an interruption like he did with his house burning down, but it shows us how immediate this feedback is. The line continues along, and then you'll see it dip off again. That's when he started shearing. Things became a little distracted, and then ultimately wool was taken off these animals that were in this pen being weighed. So we lose a little bit of weight in the actual fleece weight removed from them. And then obviously the line picks back up again. It's the best example that I've got of us being able to get real-time feedback on how animals are performing. So we're currently using this for feedlot lambs. We're currently using it for containment pens where we've got ewes locked up, particularly this year where we wish we had it in a lot more pens and on a lot more farms across the place, was when we were having to containment feed much later into the season, when we've got getting later into pregnancy. We're really keen to make sure that sheep are going ahead in weight because we know we're adding fetal weight. So if a ewe's standing still or going backwards, then she is absolutely going backwards. This gives us real-time feedback. What's actually happening with those sheep? Are they maintaining like we want them to or going slightly ahead? Or are we actually holding them back a bit? Now, it's we had a recent example on this same farm where he had some feedlot lambs that we were using the Optiweigh with. We had to change from barley to wheat in their ration. Not always our best practice method of doing it. We were starting to run out of barley sooner than he realised, so it was going to have to be a quicker transition than we thought. Our strategy was just to back the total amount fed off just a little bit over a couple of days as we transitioned them onto wheat and then built them back up. What the Optiweigh was actually able to tell us was that the minute we changed to wheat, their growth rates increased and increased quite dramatically. So I don't have that one here for you today, but it showed us quite a spike on the graph to show that we weren't having any negative effect on them with the change of diet. In fact, we were having quite a positive effect, which combination of things, slightly higher protein, better test weight grain, and perhaps a fraction less fibre in their total diet, but a range of things that we got immediate feedback. Now, normally we'd be waiting 2 or 3 weeks before they came back into the yards, then we'd weigh them, then we'd try and figure out what happened. The days of that are gone. We can have this immediate feedback as it happens. So for me, right at the minute, the Optiweigh is the most exciting piece of eID equipment that there is because it's the one that comes straight to your phone with data that you can make real decisions. So if we go back to our question, why are we using eID? Why are we using any equipment? Better animals, absolutely. We can apply selection pressure if we know more about them, but absolutely better management if we can use it to make better decisions. And that's one piece of equipment. We'll talk about plenty more, but one piece of equipment that can help us on that management side. If we come back to the discussion earlier, just about population dynamics and how we might be looking to try and influence our flock structure, I think it's important to also note that we don't have the same national flock structure that we used to. The old humble merino weather has gone missing from our system, and the weather used to play an incredibly important role, and that's that no one was ever emotionally attached to weathers. So the minute any sort of pressure came on, we decided we need to drop our stocking rate at all. The weathers just went straight out the gate. No one hesitated. They were gone. And the reality is nationally now, we just don't have them in the system like we used to. We don't have that relief valve. And So if you're a trader, then it's simpler. You just don't buy as many sheep, or you make a decision and you pull the trigger on that trade earlier. If you're a breeder, the problem is we become emotionally attached to all of our breeders, and so we're more likely to hold on to them. And so despite the fact that we might have a variation that looks like this in our breeders, we don't know who they are. And so we tend to, again, just sell an age group, or we hold on to everything and try and feed everything through rather than having the sort of agility in our stocking rate that we should have that allows us to just peel off a few numbers. If we know who those poor performers are, then it's a great feeling to offload them instead of it being a negative feeling around that whole thing of, oh, we have to sell some breeders. Why not sell some breeders that we know aren't as good as the rest of them, and our flock is better tomorrow than it was yesterday? That's the real advantage of identifying who our poor performers are, so that the minute we need to, we can pull the trigger on them. They might be fine to stay on the place at the moment, but if the pressure comes on, then we look to offload some. So I guess now we want to talk about what we might actually want to record. And I've gone through this again over a number of years trying to figure out what is it that we actually want to know about our sheep, what might influence our decision making, what's easy to collect. And we've gone from collecting huge amounts of data, which has a number of problems associated with it. One is it all takes time and labour. Almost everything we collect requires some input from a labour point of view, but also it becomes a beast when it comes to managing that data, which I know there's a future webinar coming up that's going to help you with that. But one warning I give you is the more you collect, the more you have to try and analyse and interpret and turn into a decision. So let's start simple is my key recommendation. Yep.
Can I just ask a question? How long does it take to train the sheep to use the OptiWay?
Great question. So if you go and grab an OptiWay and you stick it out in the middle of a paddock, we've had quite a few people say OptiWay is useless, doesn't work, sheep won't go near it. Of course they don't. If we want sheep to use anything, we need to train them onto it. So I would say by far the best time to train an animal. One is if mum does it, it must be safe. So imprinting is really important. So there's the first tip. The second one is we've dropped them into a feedlot pen or in a containment pen where animals are pretty bored and they're willing to go and have a look at anything. The smell of salt's right there, so they'll go and find it quite easily. So in a containment or feedlot scenario, we have had absolutely no trouble at all getting them onto it. If we are setting up, and this is the way I think we'll see it used across my client base, is there won't be a single day of the year where that OptiWay isn't somewhere with sheep. Now, in an ideal world, we would have it going through paddocks while we've got lambs at foot. And if the ewes are willing to walk in and get a lick of salt and capture a weight for us, the lambs will quickly figure out that that thing's not a bad place to go. So my two tips are do it where we've got them as a captive audience in containment or a feedlot, and make sure that we train them with mum, because if mum does it, it must be safe. Which goes for literally anything in your farming system. If you want a lamb to do something, show them with mum. Walk into the woolshed, eat from a particular type of feeder, eat a particular type of grain. If you want them to do anything, show them with mum. So it's a good point, because we need to make sure people are actually thinking about that, not just dropping a big blue box out in the middle of a paddock and hoping that everyone goes towards it, because they won't. All right, so in terms of data collection and how and what we might try and collect, my first tip for you is you need to understand, and most of you will have a handle on this, but perhaps not the way that you could be using it, and that is that when you order your tags, you get this thing called a bucket file, or you should get this thing called a bucket file. So if you're not, then you just need to request it. But to explain what a bucket file is, on the outside of your tag, you have a printed number and that might be that you've ordered from 1 to 2,000 or whatever your numbering system is. And the electronic number for the tag, the bit that's produced by the microchip, is a random 16-digit number. So it's an individual number, but it's not got any link to the number that's printed on the outside of the tag. Basically what happens is that there's an Excel file or a CSV file that brings those two numbers together, and they've called it a bucket file. Why it's called a bucket file, I have absolutely no idea, but it's very useful for you because we can actually set up a recording system that's really simple. It doesn't even require you to have a tag reader. So first step, if you know what's printed on the outside of your tags, then we can actually start recording that sequence. So at landmarking, for instance, at the moment, I've got quite a lot of clients that will be writing down just the sequence of tags going into each mob. So that will be, when they've ordered their tags, they might have 1 to 2,000 is their range in tag numbers. They will write down that for the first mob, which are twins by this particular sire or twins by this breed of ram, they will write down that 1 to 387 is a twin by that particular thing. Just write it down in their little notebook. And then they can go back to that bucket file at any stage and match that data off to say that they are a twin-born lamb. So it might be simply they just want to know who their twins and who their singles are. As long as we know the tag sequence that went into all of the twin lambs, we can go back to our bucket file and we can match that data off. And that gives us an opportunity to actually be recording our first bit of data without actually reading a single tag with an electronic reader, a wand or panel reader or anything. It's just knowing which sequence of tags are going into which sheep. If we're talking about a prime lamb operation, so this is again talking breeders, but if we're talking breeders, then we're looking at birth status, pregnancy status, and potentially a 1.5-year-old standard reference weight. They're the 3 key pieces of data that I want to know. So birth status, because, and I'll talk about this a bit more, but we should only be ever comparing singles with singles and twins with twins. Pregnancy status, because if we're already scanning a ewe, she's already there, and if our preg scanner in particular can record that information against the tag for us, then that's great. But even if they can't, and I can just run back down the race later on at some point, even if it's not until we're doing a pre-lambing drench or something, we can just scan those ewes as they're coming through the yards to record that they are scanned as a twin this year. There's a couple of reasons that we might want to know that. First one is that gives us a bit of selection pressure we could apply later on if we wanted to only keep out those that are having twins, but also it can give us a bit of feedback to our management. If I've got ewes that are constantly cycling from twin back to single, then it's probably going to ask a few questions of my management. Am I giving her the chance to express their potential, or am I punishing her a bit with condition score and nutrition and not allowing her to back up again to give us twins again the following year? And the 1.5-year-old standard reference weight, particularly on the prime lamb side of things, is only just because we know certainly on the composite side there's been a few issues with some very big ewes. I would like to apply some selection pressure on that just to pull that back a bit, which doesn't necessarily require eID, but I would certainly be applying a bit of pressure just to get rid of those really big ewes out of the system. From a merino breeder point of view, we've got birth status, again, so that we're comparing like animals, which I'll talk about. Fleece weight and micron, because if we're in merinos, then why wouldn't we be looking at what we're actually producing on the wool front? And that can be done in shed for you. So with most likely these days with an OFTA unit in your shed, so the test is actually done there and then for you. Again, 1.5-year-old standard reference weight. That's partly if we think sheep are too small, which is sometimes the case in some of our more traditional merinos, or too big in some of our more modern, then it just gives us an opportunity to apply some selection pressure there. And again, pregnancy status. If we've got the ewes coming through the yards, we're capturing a pregnancy status on them, why wouldn't we record it? It's as close as we can get to a free piece of data. That along with the birth status, which we can do just with the tag sequence. So just to finish out on that breeding side of it, the main thing I'm actually looking for is to stop the mistakes on our culling and our selection pressure that we're applying. So I said before that we should only compare twins with twins and singles with singles. Particularly on the merino side, we've got 150 years of evidence of showing that we've been getting this wrong. Because when we just run all of our lambs together and we start applying selection pressure to them, we're not comparing apples and apples. So we know that a twin-born merino may be smaller, so the lamb may be smaller. It will cut you slightly less wool, and it will be at a slightly higher micron. That's an impact of being born as a twin. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep it. because genetically it actually can still be a very good animal. It just means we should only be comparing twins with twins and singles with singles. And then, obviously, a relative ranking within their groups there. I think part of our issue when we're talking breeders is that we've been doing a lot of culling, and often we haven't been holding the mirror up to ourselves to ask, is it her fault or is it ours? And so just simply by capturing a bit more of the data on the way through, we can start to piece together whether it's a lack of performance or a lack of opportunity. Now, I did grapple with whether I should or shouldn't leave this next graph in, but I decided to put it in. And as someone who teaches public speaking and presentation training, it's a shocking graph, but I want to talk you through it briefly. So this is the most complex graph I've ever produced about sheep. Across the bottom, we have the ewe live weight. Up the side, we have the total kilograms of lamb that she weaned. So this comes out of some trial work that we were playing around with. So we were able to match lambs back to their ewes and calculate the total kilos of lamb weaned per ewe. So you'll see that clearly we've got some ewes that might be around 60 kilos here, who are doing a pretty good job of weaning a fair few kilos in lamb. The colour of the dot is the condition score of the sheep at weaning. So the whole reason I show you this is just to demonstrate that we really don't know what's going on inside our flock. Because if I was just to ask you to draft some ewes visually at weaning, we're going to draft off the sheep that look the best. We're going to pick those that we're going to retain, and we're going to draft off the skinny ewes that are a bit light in condition, don't look quite as good. But when we look at this data, those skinny ewes that are a bit lighter in condition, so these ones down here, they're in condition score, sort of around that condition score 3, some of them a bit lower, 2.7, but they're only a light ewe who's weaned us a whole lot of lamb, around that 50 kilo ewe weaning us 60 kilos worth of lamb or better. And yet down the bottom right-hand corner of this graph, we've got some big, fat, shiny ewes, really high condition scores, up around condition score 4, big ewes at 75, 80 kilos or more, but they're doing bugger all for us. They're not actually producing that much lamb for us. But if we were to run them at the drafting gate, of course, our eye is going to be drawn to those big, fat, shiny ewes that look magnificent. They've just done stuff all for us. So again, our eye tends to be drawn to good sheep, not necessarily giving us any idea of what's happening production-wise. So these bottom corner, they're the sheep we should actually be asking questions of. Now, that's a challenge for us because we don't have that great link between ewes and lambs yet in terms of knowing who belongs to who, but it's certainly something that's coming and is on the horizon, and we will get at some point in the future. That will be an absolute game changer. I guess the point I really want to make is when we know more about individual animals, we can make more informed decisions rather than some of these off-the-cuff, blind decisions that we tend to make when we don't have the information available to us. I did mention it briefly earlier, but the problem of collecting a whole lot of data is that it's a complete waste of time and money unless we're actually going to use it. So I'll leave the rest of the data management for your upcoming webinar, but it is an absolute trap. The more data we collect, the harder it is to interpret. So that brings me back to what we talked about with that OptiWeigh. One thing I love about it is you can make a decision today based on what you can see in real time because it appears on your phone as a graph that day with all the information that you need. So that gives us a chance just to change gears and talk about some equipment. I think if you're trading lambs or trading sheep and you're not breeding, there is definitely, before the OptiWeigh, I would have said to you, there is limited applications for eID on farm because ultimately the animals aren't on the farm terribly long and so many of our decisions need to be made in real time. So running out and buying eID equipment, other than the fact that an auto drafter or something like that can save us a lot of time and labour, in terms of actually recording data, there's not a huge amount in it for those that are just trading animals compared to those that are breeding, where they get longer time with the animal, more opportunities to apply selection pressure, all those sorts of things. And so for everyone, I actually recommend that we keep our equipment as basic as we possibly can in terms of being able to read tags and implement decisions. There's a range here that I've got up on the screen. So of stick readers, we've got Allflex Gallagher, Allflex QL, and TrueTest across the top there. All good tag readers, all do a great job. The one thing you need to know about a stick reader is that it is designed to only read a tag within about 15 centimetres of the end of that stick reader. And specifically designed that way because if we have two tags in a read range, so two heads really close together, neither tag will actually read. So these are designed to only read in a really short distance. A stick reader is brilliant because it gives you the opportunity to input data. So some of these, like the TrueTest stick reader, has a touchpad on it. Same with the more expensive Gallagher version of their stick readers. They have touchpads on them so that you can actually record something in real time. So read a tag and you can type something in there against that animal. So that's great for capturing data in real time. They also allow you to display information on the screen. So if we've done something previously, we've decided that there's a group of animals that are our keeps, some that are our culls, we can actually have that displayed on the screen. So read the tag, it will come up on our screen to say she's a cull, therefore you can make that decision and rattle her so that you can draft her out at the end of the race. So we don't have to have anything big and elaborate to be able to implement some of those decisions. Those stick readers will do it for us. The panel readers that we've got along the bottom there, again, I don't get too fussed about what brand you're using. It's more about where you're going to get your best backup service. And so if you've got a good rep in your area, that's probably the way I would lean. But it is a panel reader is designed to be a fixed position reading, so a stationary animal in front of that panel so that it reads the tags. They're not designed for animals running past it. They're just designed to capture that read. So in a weigh crate or in an auto drafter or in a handler, that's what a panel reader is designed to do. Again, if you get two tags in that read range, it won't read either of them. And so it's just trying to get one tag in that read range at any one time. There's going to be an opportunity for questions at the end of this too. So I will rattle through the equipment a bit as we go, and people can ask questions at the end if they've got specific questions about them. When we get onto weigh crates, you can obviously go for a manual weigh crate. Clearly, there's a lot of interest in auto drafters. Auto drafters are absolutely brilliant in what they can do. The challenge of an auto drafter clearly is cost, because by the time you set one up with a panel reader and an indicator, you're looking at around well, certainly in the north of $20,000. So and pushing in that mid-20s sort of direction, depending on which brand you're looking at. They are fantastic because we can implement decisions very efficiently. But the reality is a lot of those decisions, unless you're a stud where you're recording a lot of data all the time and doing a lot of complex drafts, the reality is most of the time we're only implementing these decisions, particularly on a culling or a selection basis, once a year. So to go and buy an auto drafter on that basis to use it once a year doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. I would prefer a piece of equipment that we're going to use more often. Having said that, I bought an auto drafter back in about 2005 for the farm that I was managing, and that was simply so that I could weigh sheep more efficiently. So when it was just me in the yards, I could weigh a lot of sheep very quickly, just me and one dog, and we could get through them. It wasn't on the basis of eID. It happens to have that capability and still works quite efficiently. So there's still a very good piece of gear, but I would just think about that decision around whether you actually need it from an eID point of view, or whether you actually can justify it from a purely weighing, and then you just happen to get the benefits from eID. The same goes for sheep handlers. Clearly, we can implement drafting decisions and things using technology and using the data. Using a sheep handler, there's all manner of options when it comes to handlers, and we've got a range of them across my client base. I actually really like the little sheep immobilizer because all it does is just grab a sheep, hold it there stationary, hasn't got as many moving parts, can have a drafting module added to it, but it's a fraction of the cost of some of the bigger ones. But clearly, the bigger ones have a lot more capability where they can tip an animal on its side for crutching and foot pairing, things like that. For all of them, the key consideration, whether we're talking auto drafters, handlers, we have to be prepared to spend money on the lead up to make sure we can get sheep into them, because too often I see someone buy a handler or buy an auto drafter and then complain that sheep won't go through them. And it's nothing to do with the handler or the auto drafter. It is the fact that their lead up just isn't good enough to flow sheep through them properly. So you have to think about that. I won't talk more about the Optiway. I've probably talked about it too much already, other than just to say, I think for people trading sheep, for anyone who's doing a lot of containment feeding or feedlotting, I'd be amazed if we don't see them all over the countryside, because to me they are a very efficient piece of equipment that can inform our decision making.
Nathan, can you just comment on the accuracy of the weighing?
Yeah, I can. So it's been an incredibly, so the cattle one was released earlier than the sheep one because they seem to be able to get that algorithm right more quickly. The one client of mine who has used it the most, we were a bit nervous. As long as we were getting a good relative change in live weight, we weren't too worried if it was exactly right with actual weight. But as he weighed all of his lambs into his pens, and the weight that the Optiway returned was exactly the same as what his weight was entering. So what I'm really wanting it to show me is the change in weight rather than absolute weight. If it's out by a kilo or whatever, I don't particularly care, but so far it's proving to be fine on that front. I think the things you have to watch is dirt building up underneath the platforms and some of those things that can affect some of that weight. But that's a people issue, not an equipment issue necessarily. So I've been pleasantly surprised with what we've seen of them so far.
So do you have to calibrate it between mature animals and lambs, or it's just an absolute weight? Yep. And my other thought was before you showed a drop when the fleeces were taken off.
Yep.
So, but you wouldn't probably want to estimate your fleece weight from that change.
No. So we have tried estimated fleece weights through weighing animals in and out of sheds and all sorts of things, and we cannot get it accurate enough. So that was one of the things that I thought was going to be a really simple way of us establishing fleece weights for animals, is weigh them in and weigh them out. There's too many other changes that are happening in that process with emptying sheep out and things that brings that completely unstuck, unfortunately.
Thanks.
It's all right. Just to round out some of the products, we also have variable rate drench guns. And I just had a really simple example from a client recently who bought one of these Tapari ones, the one at the bottom. And the reason they bought it was because they were using Flexalt, the oral lice treatment, and they actually went to the trouble of doing the calculations to work out what the difference would be or was over the course of their use. So they had a lot of sheep to treat, 8,961 sheep to treat. If they were to just use a normal drench gun at the correct rate for each of those groups of animals, it was going to require 72 litres. So basically the way these variable rate drench guns work is if you've got a handler, animal comes onto the handler, its weight is recorded, and the drench gun automatically adjusts to the correct dose for that animal's weight. In this case, when they used this drench gun, it reduced the amount of Flexalt that they were using down to 44 litres. So that was a saving of 28 litres. And for anyone who's ever priced or used or bought Flexalt, you'll know that turns into a lot of dollars. So for a drench gun, they're not a cheap drench gun by any means. So you're over $1,000 for the drench gun, but when in that one event, it saved them $7,000. So again, a really simple, practical application of technology, not specifically eID, but again, it can all be matched to the equipment that we're using. So all of that circles us back to the question of what do you actually want to achieve? What information do we need that can help you improve your productivity or perhaps just save you time? Sometimes we're not just chasing profit. Sometimes we just like more time at the beach. Sometimes we would like to be able to go and do things that we want to do other than just chase sheep around all the time. Particularly for those of you that are a mixed farming operation, absolutely finding some ways to track things. So one of my big bugbears with most of my clients are mixed farming operations is that the minute the air seeder comes out or the minute the header comes out, we tend to lose a little bit of focus of what's happening with our sheep. So again, any technology that helps us not drop the ball during that period is something that we should be considering, and certainly that's another plug perhaps for something like the OptiWeight. What I really want to be able to do in the future is find those ewes that have actually weaned us all of that lamb. Within the merino system. At the moment, our merino system is so heavily reliant on the meat side of it. We want to know who's actually weaning the lambs for us, who's producing heavier lambs, where are we getting our growth rates from, how much are individual lambs actually growing, when are they doing it, is it our pastures that are letting us down, is it our management that's letting us down? Because I think the more we find out, the more we're going to realise that a lot of our issues aren't sheep issues, they're people issues. And just to finish off, the final piece to this whole puzzle is something that's been incredibly frustrating and I've been talking about for a long time, but we're finally starting to see it hit the ground is hook tracking systems. And that is being able to match the tag of the lamb to the hook that lamb ends up hanging on in the processor, and everywhere it goes, we know who that lamb is and where it came from. The first step of that, and the reason we're interested in it, is it gives us real health data. So in other words, if you've got needle bruising from where you're injecting animals, if you've got dog bites, if we've got grass seed issues on particular lambs, if we've got pleurisy, arthritis, any of those things, you will get the feedback. Instead of just having a lamb come back and it's stressed out at 14 kilos when the bloody thing should have been 18 or 20 kilos, you will actually find out why. It will also give us, oops, that's not supposed to happen in there. Sorry, that video won't play properly, so I'll just skip past that. It will also give us DEXA, which is, so before I get to this MEQ probe, DEXA is an X-ray of that carcass, and that gives us the potential for lean meat yield. It also gives us the opportunity for the processors to use an X-ray of a carcass to be able to break that carcass down more efficiently. The MEQ probe we've got on screen gives the ability to measure meat eating quality. And so if we've got lean meat yield being measured by X-ray with the DEXA system, and we've got meat eating quality probes being used, then it gives us the opportunity, and Gundagai is currently the processor that is already doing this, but we'll start to see the others follow suit. It gives us the opportunity to actually get paid for what you produce. In other words, if you're producing a better product than everyone else, better meat eating quality, better lean meat yield, you will actually get paid for it. So that's the exciting part. Is that we will start to see some of these. I have said that a long time ago that we would start to see some of these things come in with hook tracking, but we are finally making some progress on that front. And you'll start to see a lot more of that over this next 12 months to 2 years as it gets bedded down a bit better than what it has been. I think ultimately I've talked about equipment, I've talked about tags. Tags don't make you money, decisions do. And so that's the bit that I really want you to remember, is that it's not the tools that make us money, it's you. So our responsibility as the farmer is to have a plan and keep it simple. And constantly you ask yourself that question of why. Why are we looking at the technology in the first place? Are we trying to breed better animals? Are we trying to improve our management? What are those things that we're missing currently from our system? What are those top 3 things that we want to try and improve? And if eID doesn't have a role to play in those top 3 things, then don't worry about it yet. It's great that we've got it there and we've got access to it and it can do amazing things for us. But your first priority has to be figuring out what those top 3 things are and how you can improve your decision-making or improve your selection pressure you're applying on your farm to improve the overall performance of your business. After all, whatever we do well today, we can do better tomorrow. Thanks very much.
That's excellent. Thank you, Nathan. It really highlights the opportunity out there, but it really starts with planning what those goals are on farm and then working out how to do it afterwards. So, but good application there too for both small and larger scale and trading versus breeding sort of operations as well. So covered it really well. Do people have any questions they'd like to ask Nathan? You can pop it in the chat or take yourself, pop your camera back on.
Hi, Nathan. With the equipment, we're speaking with farmers, the issue of power to the handlers and things can be sometimes a bit tricky and something that we forget about So what are your experiences or your clients' experiences? Is it get the 240 volt there, or can we use generators or solar?
So a lot of them are designed to be run with 12 volt power, and the risk is that every time we use anything that converts 240 volt power down to 12 volt, it often creates electrical noise, which can interfere with our panel readers. So that's one of the things that has held up the implementation of hook tracking in processing plants. They have heaps of electrical motors, they have heaps of power converters, and so it creates this electrical noise which can interfere with things. So one, if you are using a 240 volt to 12 volt converter, you need to make sure it's a good one and talk to the equipment supplier. But yeah, it is a bit of a challenge. My preference is that we are running off a good battery, because the other thing is too, often the battery that gets used is not a brand new one. It's the one that someone had sitting somewhere, and that causes a problem. So often the problem that we're having is because the battery is actually genuinely no good. So if we're going to spend this money on a decent piece of gear, make sure it's got a good battery with it. That's not to say you can't use the 240 volt converters, because the good ones are good, and that means you just don't have to worry about it. The other one, while you're talking about that, would be air. So we obviously, lots of these things are air operated. The best thing you can do is use high pressure poly running all the way back to your compressor in a shed. It basically gives you an enormous tank, because we're using the pipe as pressure, and it takes all the noise further away from where the sheep are. So it's a really simple one that people should be thinking about as well.
Thanks.
Did you have a question, Fiona? No. Come on to say hi. Okay. If there's no further questions, I might get you to stop sharing, Nathan. And I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see that? Oh, not yet. Everyone?
Yep.
Trying to get it to. So for further information for things that are coming out of this PDS, so today's webinar is going to be emailed out to everyone that registered for the webinar and available on our grower group channels as well. We're putting together 20 grower case studies. They're available on the MLA website, and we'll provide some links as well to those case studies when we send the webinar recording out. And just highlighting a couple of field days coming up. So the Summer Farming Systems Feed-Based Focus Field Day on the 3rd of September at Rokewood, and BCG Main Field Day as well on the 10th of September at Birchip. We'll have speakers there talking about how they've used eID and how they've made it work for them as well. So, and just to follow up on these two webinars, the next webinar is going to be on data collection, as we've mentioned, with Jess Mulholland from NextGen Agri and farmer Andrew Whitlock coming along to talk about his experiences. And so this next slide shows a couple of QR codes there, which we'll also send out with the webinar recording, that you can register for those on Thursday, 4th of September and Wednesday, 10th of September. So I'd just like to thank you all for coming along today, especially to Nathan for that great presentation. Thank you to MLA and the Producer Demonstration Site program. And to all our growers that have participated in our case studies, helping to share information along the way. So without further ado, I'll bring it to a close. Thanks very much, everyone, for coming.